The moment I saw my brother whispering to a man in a gray suit at my mother's retirement party, the man with a leather briefcase and the kind of eyes that scan a room like he's cataloging everything in it, I felt my stomach drop. My brother didn't notice me watching. He never does. He was too busy pointing at me across the room the same way he always has, like I'm a problem he's been trying to solve his entire life. I should back up. My name isn't important right now. What matters is that I'm 31 years old, I teach second grade at a public school in Kitchener, Ontario, and 6 months before that party, our grandmother passed away and left me her house. Not split between us, not divided fairly, just me. The house was a semi-detached in Hamilton, nothing glamorous but paid off, worth just over $480,000 in the current market. Gran had lived there for 40 years. I used to take the GO train down every second weekend to visit her, help her with groceries, sit with her through her chemo appointments. My brother, I'll call him by what Gran used to call him, her golden boy, though she stopped using that phrase sometime around his 40th birthday, lived 40 minutes away and visited maybe twice a year. At Christmas, if the roads were good. When the lawyer read the will in March, my brother's face did something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't anger, not right away. It was this slow, awful blank, like a computer screen going dark before it restarts into something dangerous. He didn't say anything at the meeting. He hugged me in the parking lot, told me Gran knew what she was doing, told me congratulations. His voice was perfectly level. That should have told me everything. The calls started 2 weeks later. First it was our aunt, Gran's daughter from her second marriage, a woman I'd always liked, who called to ask, gently, whether I had perhaps spent a lot of time with Gran in her final months. I said yes, of course. I said I was there almost every weekend. She said that was wonderful, and then, after a pause, "Your brother just mentioned that Gran seemed confused toward the end, that she was saying things that didn't quite make sense." I sat with that for a moment. Gran had been sharp until almost the very end. She'd beaten me at cribbage 3 weeks before she passed. She wasn't confused, I said. "Of course," my aunt said, and changed the subject. The next call came from our cousin in Mississauga, then from my mother's old friend who'd known our family since before I was born. Each conversation had the same shape, a little warmth, a little small talk, and then a gentle, almost apologetic suggestion that maybe Gran hadn't been entirely herself when she made her final decisions, that maybe I had been around so much because I was, well, looking for something. I knew exactly what was happening. My brother was working the phones. I didn't confront him. I'd learned over 31 years that confronting my brother directly is like poking a wasp nest with your bare hand. He doesn't get loud. He gets methodical. And methodical is so much worse. What I did instead was call Gran's family lawyer, a woman named Ms. Osei Bonsu, the same one who'd handled the estate, and ask whether the will could be challenged on grounds of undue influence or diminished capacity. She walked me through it plainly, the way I appreciated. In Ontario, a challenge like that would require medical evidence, witness testimony, and a genuine legal process. The threshold was high. Gran had signed everything in the presence of a notary and 2 independent witnesses. She'd also left a letter, sealed, addressed to me, given to Ms. Osei Bonsu with specific instructions to hold it until the estate was settled. I hadn't opened it yet. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of what it would cost me emotionally. Maybe I just wasn't ready. The retirement party was my mother's idea. 32 years with the same school board, and she wanted to celebrate properly, so we rented the private room at a restaurant in Guelph and invited everyone who mattered. My brother came with his wife and their 2 kids. He was warm, sociable, the version of himself that makes people adore him in the first 10 minutes of a conversation. I watched him work the room. I noticed the man in the gray suit arrive 40 minutes in, order nothing, and spend most of his time near the back wall, taking slow, deliberate looks around. During the speeches, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way back, I passed close enough to the back corner to catch my brother's voice. And she's been like this for years, always positioning herself. Our grandmother was 78 and going through chemo, and my sister never left her side. I just want to know if that constitutes. I kept walking. My hands were shaking by the time I got back to my seat. I texted my husband under the table. That man my brother's been talking to. Leather briefcase, gray suit. He's not a guest. My husband, patient, practical, the kind of person who thinks before he speaks, texted back 4 minutes later. I looked him up on LinkedIn. He's a private investigator based out of Burlington. I put my phone face down on the table and smiled through the rest of the speeches. That night, after the kids were in bed at my mother's house, I finally opened Gran's letter. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered, but steady. She'd written 3 pages. I won't share all of it. Some of it is too private, the kind of thing that belongs only to the two of us. But the part that mattered, the part that made me sit on the edge of my childhood bed and breathe very carefully for several minutes, was this. Gran had known for the last 2 years of her life that money was missing from the family business. The business was a small import company, specialty food products, mostly European. Gran had co-founded it with her second husband in the early 90s. After he passed, she retained a 30% stake, largely silent, while a board of 3 managed daily operations. My brother had joined the board 7 years ago. Gran had noticed, around the time her health declined and she stopped attending monthly meetings, that her quarterly distributions had started coming in lower than projected. She'd asked questions. The answers were always reasonable. She trusted them. But she'd also kept records. Old-fashioned, handwritten ledgers, the kind that don't disappear when a hard drive is wiped. She told me in the letter where to find them. She told me she hadn't gone to the police because she wasn't certain, and because she was tired, and because she didn't want her last months to be consumed by a legal battle with her own grandson. She told me she was leaving it to me to decide what to do with what I found. I sat there for a long time. Then I called Ms. Oseibansu's emergency line. She'd given it to me specifically at the end of the estate meeting, which I now understood differently, and left a voicemail. The ledgers were exactly where Gran said they'd be, a fireproof lockbox in the basement of her Hamilton house, which was technically already mine. My husband drove me down on a Sunday morning. The lockbox key was on Gran's keyring, the one the lawyer had given me with the rest of her personal effects. Inside were 4 years of handwritten records alongside printed copies of quarterly statements from the business. Gran had been comparing them. The numbers didn't match. Not always, not dramatically, but consistently. Small discrepancies, the kind that require you to be looking for them to notice. Over 4 years, the gap between what should have been distributed and what actually arrived in Gran's account came to somewhere between $140,000 and $160,000. I photographed everything with my phone. Then I sat on the basement floor of my grandmother's house and thought about the man in the gray suit at my mother's party. My brother had hired someone to investigate me, to find proof that I had manipulated a sick old woman. And while he was doing that, I was sitting in her basement holding proof of what he'd actually done. The specific irony of that didn't hit me until I was back in the car. Then I started crying, and I couldn't entirely explain to my husband whether I was crying from grief or from something that felt disturbingly like relief. Miss Oseibansu was thorough and steady, the kind of professional who makes you feel like the situation is serious but survivable. She referred me to a forensic accountant she'd worked with before, a woman out of Toronto who specialized in estate and business fraud, and within 3 weeks we had a clearer picture. The discrepancies in Gran's records were consistent with a pattern of unauthorized fund transfers, small enough individually to stay beneath automatic review thresholds, systematic enough over time to suggest they weren't accidental. The forensic accountant used a word I had to look up: siphoning. Slow, deliberate, careful. My brother was not the sole signatory on the business accounts, but he was the board member most directly responsible for the financial oversight that Gran had gradually stepped back from. He had introduced the accountant, who'd replaced the original one. He had recommended the switch to a new banking system 3 years ago. I want to be fair. I want to say that in those weeks, I genuinely tried to imagine an innocent explanation. I did. I sat with it. I thought about the brother who used to drive me to swim practice when I was 12, who showed up to my convocation, who cried at our father's funeral. I thought about all of it. Then I looked at the numbers again. I reported the findings to the RCMP's Financial Crimes Division in late October. I also filed a report with the Ontario Securities Commission because the business had minority outside investors. Miss Osei Bonsu walked me through each step. She had clearly done this before. Meanwhile, my brother's investigator was apparently still working. I know this because of what happened at Christmas. My brother had coordinated a family gathering at our aunt's place in Burlington, which was, in retrospect, deliberately orchestrated. Halfway through dinner, he asked if he could say something. He stood up, held a glass of wine, and delivered what I can only describe as a prepared statement. He talked about Gran. He talked about family integrity. He said that he had retained a professional at significant personal expense to review the circumstances of Gran's final years and that he had uncovered serious concerns. He said he had statements from two of Gran's former neighbors, women she'd known for decades, who confirmed that I had been at the house constantly in her last year, that I had driven her to appointments, that I had helped her with paperwork. He paused, apparently for effect. I looked at him across my aunt's dining room table. I thought, he has no idea. Those things are true, I said calmly. I was there. I helped her. She asked me to. He said that a pattern of calculated presence during a vulnerable period designed to influence testamentary decisions was legally actionable. I said I was aware of what was legally actionable. He said he intended to contest the will. I said that was his right, and that I'd ask my lawyer to be in touch. Then I asked my aunt if there was more of the potato gratin because it was genuinely very good, and I wasn't going to let my brother ruin my appetite on top of everything else. The RCMP made contact with the business in January. I wasn't there for it. I don't know the exact sequence of events. Investigations aren't narrated to you in real time, which is something television has completely failed to prepare people for. What I know is what Ms. Osei Bonsu told me, that the Financial Crimes Unit had reviewed the documentation, that they had interviewed several parties, and that the matter was proceeding as an active investigation. My brother called me the night of January 14th. I didn't answer. He called again the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. His message was brief and very strange. He said he needed to talk to me, that there had been a misunderstanding, that things were being taken out of context. His voice had a quality I'd never heard in it before, something unsteady. I called Ms. Osei Bonsu instead. She told me not to speak to my brother directly until the investigation concluded. She said it in the same calm, professional tone she used for everything, which somehow made it feel less terrifying and more simply like a thing that was happening in the world. My mother called me in February. She'd been largely quiet through all of this. She'd separated from our father years ago. She'd built her own life. She loved us both in the separate compartments she'd constructed for that love. I think she'd been hoping it would somehow resolve without requiring her to be in the middle of it. But she called me on a Tuesday evening, and when I answered, she was crying. Not dramatically. Just that quiet, exhausted kind of crying that happens when someone has been holding something for too long. He called me, she said. He told me you reported him to the police. I did, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Did you have to? It was the question I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. And I want to be honest about this, because I think being honest about it matters. There was a moment, a real one, not a dramatic movie pause, but an actual quiet moment in my kitchen where I thought about what it would have cost me to do nothing, to take the house and let the rest of it alone, to let whatever my brother had done stay buried under Gran's careful, handwritten records. But Gran had told me where to find those records. She'd spent the last year of her life making sure I would have them. She could have destroyed them. She could have told the lawyer to dispose of them. She made a different choice, and she explained it quietly in her letter. I couldn't do it myself. I'm too tired, but it isn't right, and I don't want to pretend it is. Yes, I told my mother. I had to. She cried for a little while longer. I stayed on the phone. Eventually, she said she loved me, and I said I loved her, and we hung up, and I sat in my kitchen for a long time after. The charge came in March, almost exactly a year after Gran's will was read. My brother was charged with fraud over $5,000 under the Criminal Code of Canada, along with 2 counts related to breach of fiduciary duty. The business had also initiated its own civil proceedings against him. I found out from Ms. Osibansu, who called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I was still at school, it was prep period, and I was photocopying a spelling worksheet, and I sat down on the floor of the copy room and just breathed for a moment. One of the custodians found me there. He's a sweet older man who brings me Tim Hortons sometimes when the mornings are rough. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat down beside me on the floor for a minute, patted my hand once, and then got up and went back to work. I've thought about that moment a lot. The will challenge was quietly dropped sometime around April. I don't know exactly when. It wasn't announced, just ceased to be a thing that was happening. Ms. Osibansu mentioned it in passing during one of our calls, the way you might mention that the rain had stopped. The house transferred to me in full in June. I drove to Hamilton on the first Saturday after the paperwork cleared. I unlocked the front door with Gran's key. I hadn't changed it, and I stood in the front hall for a long time. It still smelled like her, like that particular lavender hand cream she'd used for as long as I could remember. I don't know yet what I'll do with it. I'm not ready to sell it. Maybe I'll rent it for now, or maybe I'll wait. My husband says we don't have to decide anything yet. He's right. I took one thing home with me that day, the cribbage board, the one she'd beaten me with 3 weeks before she died. It's sitting on our bookshelf now. People ask me sometimes, since the story got out, as these things do, because my brother's wife told her sister, who told someone who apparently posts to a Facebook group about Ontario's estate law, of all things, they asks me if I feel guilty. I've sat with that question. I've given it the respect it deserves. My brother stole from a dying woman. He stole slowly, carefully, in amounts he calculated wouldn't be noticed. He stole from his own grandmother while she was going through chemotherapy, while I was sitting with her at the Juravinsky Cancer Center, while she was trying to understand why her quarterly deposits kept coming in lower than expected. And then he hired someone to prove that I was the one who had wronged her. I don't feel guilty. That's not a hard answer for me anymore, even if it was once. What I feel is something quieter and harder to name, something like the specific sadness of losing a brother you mostly lost a long time ago, in all the ways that actually matter. The legal part is almost beside the point. The grief is about something older than any of this. Gran knew, I think. She knew what she was asking me to carry. She left me the house because she trusted me with it. She left me the records because she trusted me with that, too. I tried to be worthy of that trust. I'm not sure I always am, but I try. My second graders don't know any of this, which is exactly how it should be. They think I'm just their teacher, the one who does the funny voices during read aloud, who keeps a jar of goldfish crackers for rough afternoons, who gets too emotionally invested in their science fair projects. I brought the cribbage board in once for a math lesson, to teach probability. One of my students asked whose it was. I said it belonged to someone who loved me very much. That's the whole story, really. Everything else is just what happened around it.